On a night when the city of Boston was being lashed by an unforgiving, freezing rain, a simple act of kindness was about to set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. For Nora Kelly, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and sacrificing her dreams for her family, giving her most prized possession, a hand-knitted scarf, to a shivering stranger, was a simple human impulse. She had no idea that this one gesture would lead her into the crosshairs of one of the most powerful and ruthless billionaires in the country, a man who would first try to destroy her and then be forced to see the world through her eyes. This isn't just a story about a scarf. It's about how a single thread of compassion can unravel an empire of suspicion and weave a new destiny. The rain didn't just fall, it assaulted the city. It came down in icy sheets, driven by a wind that howled through the narrow streets of Boston's North End like a vengeful ghost. Inside the Gilded Spoon, the air was thick with the smells of garlic-steamed mussels and damp wool. For Nora Kelly, it was just another Tuesday, another 12-hour shift of balancing plates, refilling water glasses, and forcing a smile that felt heavier with each passing hour. Nora was a ghost in her own life. By day, she haunted the back tables of the bistro, a silent, efficient presence. By night, she haunted her tiny drafty apartment, where canvases leaned against every wall, their blank faces a constant mocking reminder of the artist she was supposed to be. The dream of painting, of creating, had been deferred, then shelved, and was now gathering the dust of harsh reality. Her younger brother, Leo, a musical prodigy, with a once-in-a-generation talent for the cello, was her sole focus. His acceptance into the prestigious Vienna Conservatory of Music was a blinding light of hope for their family, but its tuition was a mountain of debt she was determined to conquer, one meager tip at a time. Her phone buzzed in her apron. A text from Leo. "Professor Miller said my audition tape was breathtaking. He's sending it to the board for the scholarship consideration." Fingers crossed. A real smile, genuine and warm, finally broke through Nora's practiced facade. She typed back, "That's amazing. They'd be fools not to pick you. Love you." She shoved the phone back into her pocket, the brief moment of joy instantly tempered by the cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. The scholarship would only cover half. The other half was on her. Kelly Table 4 needs their check, and the couple at 7 have been waiting for bread for 5 minutes. "Stop daydreaming," barked Mr. Henderson. The manager, his voice, a familiar rasp of irritation. "On it," Nora said, her smile vanishing as she slipped back into her waitress persona. The night wore on, a monotonous blur of clattering dishes and demanding customers. Around 9 p.m., as the dinner rush began to thin, Nora was tasked with wiping down the front windows, a futile effort against the relentless streaks of rain. It was then that she saw her. An old woman huddled in the recessed doorway of the closed bakery next door. She was small and frail, her thin coat utterly useless against the biting wind. Her hair, a cloud of silver white, was plastered to her scalp, and she was shivering so violently that Nora could see it from across the street. But it was her eyes that caught Nora. They were wide and disoriented, filled with a profound, terrifying confusion. She looked utterly lost. Most people rushed past, heads down, collars up, lost in their own worlds. But Nora couldn't look away. She saw her own grandmother in that woman's fragile frame, her own fear of being old and alone in a world that had moved on too fast. "Henderson, I need 5 minutes," Nora said, already untying her apron. "You don't get 5 minutes. We're still open," he grumbled without looking up from his ledger. "It's an emergency," she said, her voice firm. She didn't wait for a reply. Grabbing her coat from the staff closet, her fingers brushed against the soft, familiar wool of her grandmother's scarf. It was a beautiful thing, knitted in a complex cable pattern of deep forest green and cream. Her Nana had made it for her before she passed, and it was the one possession Nora truly treasured. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a scent that was inextricably linked to every happy memory of her childhood. It was her armor against the world. Without a second thought, she pulled it on, grabbed an umbrella, and pushed her way out into the storm. The wind nearly ripped the umbrella from her hand. "Mum!" Nora shouted over the gale, crouching down in front of the woman. "Mum, are you all right?" The woman looked up, her blue eyes hazy and unfocused. Her lips were tinged with blue. I don't know," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I was just walking. I think I was walking home." "Where is home?" Nora asked gently, trying to shield her from the rain. "It's the big house, with the lions," the woman said, her voice trailing off. "Robert is waiting." Nora's heart sank. She had no idea what that meant. The woman wore no jewelry, carried no purse. Her shoes were worn-out loafers soaked through. There was nothing to identify her. "Okay. Well, Robert will have to wait a little longer. You can't stay out here." "You'll freeze," Nora said. "Come inside with me. Just for a few minutes. We have hot soup." She helped the woman to her feet. Her bones felt as delicate as a bird's. As they shuffled towards the restaurant's entrance, a brutal gust of wind tore through the street. The woman cried out a small, pained sound as the cold seeped deeper into her. Acting on pure instinct, Nora unwound her grandmother's scarf from her own neck. The familiar warmth left her skin, and the cold immediately bit at her. She carefully wrapped the thick woolen scarf around the woman's neck, tucking the ends into her coat. "There," Nora said softly. "That's a bit better, isn't it?" The woman looked down at the intricate green and cream pattern, her shivering fingers tracing the cables. A flicker of clarity returned to her eyes. "This is beautiful," she murmured. "It feels warm, like a memory." Nora led her inside, ignoring Mr. Henderson's furious glare. She sat the woman at a small table in the quietest corner and rushed to the kitchen. "A bowl of the tomato bisque." "On the house," she told the chef. "Henderson will have your hide," he warned. "Let him," Nora shot back. She brought the steaming soup to the woman, who held the bowl with trembling hands, sipping it slowly. Colour began to return to her cheeks. "My name is Nora," she said, kneeling beside the table. "What's your name?" "Beatrice," the woman said, her voice a little stronger. "My name is Beatrice." "Okay, Beatrice, I'm going to call for some help. An ambulance, maybe. They can check you over and help find your home." Beatrice's eyes widened with fear. "No. No hospitals. I hate hospitals. Jonathan, he'll be so angry." Before Nora could press further, Henderson was at her side, his face a mask of fury. "Kelly, my office. Now." With a reluctant glance at Beatrice, Nora followed him. The moment the office door closed, he exploded. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? This is a business, not a homeless shelter. You brought a vagrant into my establishment. Do you know what this does to our reputation?" She was freezing to death. Nora argued, her own anger flaring. "What was I supposed to do, leave her there? You were supposed to do your job. You could have called 911 from the doorway. Instead, you bring her in, give away food, and make a scene. You're on thin ice, Kelly. Very thin ice. Get back out there, get her out of here, and clean up this mess." Nora stormed out of the office, her body trembling with rage and frustration. But when she returned to the corner table, it was empty. The soup bowl was half finished. Beatrice was gone. And so was her grandmother's scarf. Nora's heart plummeted into her stomach. She ran to the door and looked out into the rain-swept street. There was no sign of the old woman. Just the darkness, the wind, and the relentless cold rain. Beatrice had vanished, taking the last, most precious piece of Nora's past with her. 3 days passed. The rain finally subsided, leaving behind a city washed clean and a raw, lingering chill. For Nora, the chill was internal. The loss of the scarf felt like a physical ache, a hollow space just below her ribs. It was more than just wool and yarn. It was the last, tangible piece of her grandmother's love, and its absence made her feel adrift. Each time she walked past the bakery doorway, she scanned the street, hoping for a glimpse of the old woman. But there was nothing. Work at the Gilded Spoon became a tightrope walk. Mr. Henderson watched her every move, his disapproval, a constant, silent pressure. He had docked her pay for the free bowl of soup, a petty punishment that meant she'd have to skimp on her own groceries for the week. The mountain of Leo's tuition seemed to grow taller, more impassable with every passing day. It was a slow Thursday afternoon when the bell above the restaurant door chimed, announcing a customer who was distinctly out of place. He wasn't one of their usual lunch crowd regulars or a lost tourist. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Nora's rent for a year. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his face was all sharp angles and severe control. He moved with an unnerving stillness, his cold grey eyes scanning the room as if he were assessing a potential acquisition. He radiated an aura of immense, unapologetic power. He walked directly to the host stand, where Nora was folding napkins. "I'm looking for a waitress," he said. His voice was deep and resonant, but utterly devoid of warmth. "Her name is Nora Kelly." Nora's heart gave a nervous flutter. "I'm Nora Kelly. How can I help you?" His eyes narrowed slightly, sweeping over her worn uniform, her hands chapped from soap and hot water. It was a look of instant dismissal. "My name is Jonathan Devereux." The name hit Nora like a physical blow. Devereux, as in Devereux Industries, the multinational real estate and tech conglomerate, whose name was plastered on half the new skyscrapers piercing the Boston skyline. The new Devereux Tower, a monument of gleaming steel and glass, was being constructed just a few blocks from her apartment, a constant, towering symbol of a world she could never hope to touch. "I believe you met my mother, Beatrice," he continued, his tone icy. Relief washed over Nora, quickly followed by concern. "Beatrice, is she all right? I was so worried. She just disappeared." "She is fine," Jonathan Devereux cut her off, his voice sharp, "thanks to her driver, who eventually found her wandering several blocks from here, disoriented and suffering from mild hypothermia." "No thanks to you." Nora recoiled. "What, I brought her inside? I gave her soup. I was trying to help." A humorless smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes, the help. A very calculated performance, I must say. The concerned citizen, the warm bowl of soup, the conveniently loaned scarf." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a familiar bundle of green and cream wool. Nora's breath caught in her throat. Her scarf. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a piece of contaminated evidence. "My mother is a very wealthy woman, Miss Kelly," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing level. "And with wealth comes parasites. People who prey on the vulnerable. People who can spot a disoriented elderly woman and see a golden opportunity. A chance to play the hero, create a connection, and then later present a bill for their kindness." The implication was so vile, so far from the truth, that Nora could only stare at him, speechless. "Let me be clear," he went on, stepping closer. "My mother in her current state can be overly sentimental. She has been talking non-stop about the angel who gave her this. She wants to find you to thank you properly. I will not allow her to be taken advantage of." He placed the scarf on the host stand, pushing it towards her. Then he produced a thick envelope and placed it next to the scarf. "Inside this envelope is $5,000, he said, his voice a cold, flat line. "Consider it a finder's fee for the scarf and a payment for your silence. You will take this money, and you will forget you ever met Beatrice Devereux. You will not attempt to contact her. If she happens to find her way back here, you will tell her you don't remember her. Are we understood?" For a moment, Nora couldn't breathe. The sheer, insulting arrogance of the man was suffocating. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had vilely and deliberately twisted her one act of selfless compassion into a sordid, manipulative scheme. He looked at her not as a person, but as a problem to be managed, a potential threat to be neutralized with cash. And the worst part, the sick, twisted irony, was the sight of that envelope. $5,000. It was a fortune. It was a huge chunk of Leo's tuition. It was a solution to her most pressing, desperate problem sitting right there on the counter. All she had to do was swallow her pride, accept his disgusting narrative of who she was, and take it. Something inside her snapped. The exhaustion, the frustration, the constant feeling of being beaten down by the world, it all coalesced into a white-hot spark of defiance. She met his cold grey eyes with a fire of her own. "Take your money," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Take it and get out of this restaurant." Jonathan Devereux blinked, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. He clearly wasn't used to being told no. "I think you misunderstand the situation." "No, you're the one who misunderstands," Nora interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "You walk in here, and you see a uniform, not a person. You see a waitress, and you assume she's a predator. You think your money can fix everything that it can buy and sell people's decency. Well, it can't buy mine." She picked up her scarf, and clutched it to her chest. The familiar texture was a comfort and anchor. "I helped your mother because she is a human being who was in distress. It's what people are supposed to do. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you or your family. I just wanted her to be safe." She then picked up his envelope, its weight a sickening reminder of her desperation, and shoved it back into his hand. "Now please leave," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're holding up the line." Jonathan Devereux stared at her, his jaw tight. He looked from her defiant face to the envelope in his hand. For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty seemed to enter his cold eyes. He was a man who understood transactions leverage and predictable human greed. He did not understand this. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out, the bell chiming his departure. Nora stood behind the host stand, her heart hammering against her ribs, clutching her grandmother's scarf. She had won the moral victory. But as the reality of her financial situation came crashing back down, she was terrified. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. In the days following the confrontation with Jonathan, Devereux Nora's life seemed to shrink. The walls of her apartment felt closer, the city outside colder, and the numbers in her bank account mockingly small. The moral high ground she had claimed in the restaurant felt like a barren, wind-swept peak. It was righteous, but it offered no shelter from the storm of her reality. Mr. Henderson, who had witnessed the entire exchange with wide, greedy eyes, was furious. "Are you insane?" he'd hissed at her the moment Devereux was gone. "That was the Jonathan Devereux. He tried to give you money and you threw it back in his face. I don't care what he said to you, Kelly. People like us don't turn down money from people like him." His scrutiny intensified, and he began cutting her hours, citing a downturn in business that only seemed to affect her shifts. The pressure was mounting from every direction. The first tuition deposit for the Vienna Conservatory was due in 6 weeks. It was an eye-watering sum of $10,000. The $5,000 Devereaux had offered her would have been a lifeline, a tangible step towards Leo's future. Now it was just the ghost of a possibility, a constant taunting what if. One evening, nursing a cup of cheap tea that did little to warm her, Nora called Leo. She needed to hear his voice to be reminded of why she was putting herself through this. "Nora, you won't believe it," he said, his voice crackling with an energy that felt a world away. "I was practicing the Elgar cello concerto today, and Professor Miller brought in a guest conductor from the Boston Symphony. He said I have a gift he's only seen a few times in his entire career. He wants me to audition for their youth soloist program." Nora's heart swelled with pride, a painful, beautiful thing. "Leo, that's incredible, oh my God." "I know, but that's not even the best part," he rushed on, oblivious to the turmoil in her life. "I got the official packet from Vienna. They have a special intensive program for incoming scholarship students. It's a 2-week masterclass with Yo-Yo Ma's former protégé. It's before the semester starts, but it costs extra, and the deadline to register is in a month. It's a long shot, I know, but can you imagine?" Nora closed her eyes. She could imagine it. She could see Leo on a stage in a grand European hall, his cello singing under his touch. It was the brightest, most beautiful image in her mind, and it was slipping through her fingers like sand. "We'll figure it out, Leo," she said, her voice sounding thin and unconvincing even to her own ears. "You just focus on your music. Don't worry about the money. You're the best, Nora. I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, his earnest love a sharp twist in her gut. After they hung up, Nora slid to the floor of her small kitchen, the phone clattering beside her. The weight of her brother's dream was crushing her. She was failing him. Her pride, her anger at Jonathan Devereaux, what was it worth when stacked against Leo's future? Her eyes fell on a small, elegant business card lying on her cluttered counter. In his haste and confusion, Jonathan Devereaux had left it behind. A simple cream-colored card with his name and a private phone number embossed in stark black letters. She had thrown it there in disgust, intending to rip it to shreds, but she hadn't. Now it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. It was a devil's bargain sitting on her countertop. Call the number. Apologize. Grovel if she had to. Tell him she'd had time to reconsider his generous offer. It would be humiliating. It would mean admitting he was right about her, that her principles had a price tag. But it would also mean Leo could go to that masterclass. It would mean the deposit would be paid. She picked up the card, her fingers trembling. The thick cardstock felt cold, alien. She stared at the number, her thumb hovering over the dial pad on her phone. Every fiber of her being screamed against it. It was a betrayal of who she was, a surrender to the cynical, ugly world that Devereaux inhabited. But then she heard the ghost of Leo's cello in her mind, a rich, soaring melody full of hope and promise. Wasn't his dream more important than her pride? Wasn't a momentary humiliation a small price to pay for his entire future? The internal battle raged within her, a silent, vicious war. She paced her small apartment, the card clutched in her hand. She looked at her paintings, at the vibrant colors and bold strokes that represented her own stifled dreams. She was already sacrificing her own future. What was one more sacrifice? What was the cost of her soul when weighed against the sound of her brother's music, filling the world? With a choked sob of desperation, she sank onto her couch, defeated. She couldn't do it. Not yet. There had to be another way. She spent the next week in a feverish state of activity. She picked up extra shifts at a dingy bar after her shifts at the Gilded Spoon, serving watered-down drinks to surly patrons until 3 in the morning. She gathered her best paintings, the ones that held pieces of her heart, and took them to a weekend art market, standing in the cold for hours, hoping a tourist would pay $100 for a piece she'd poured her soul into. She sold 2 small canvases for a total of $150. It felt like both a victory and a profound insult. Each night she'd return home, her body aching her pockets, holding just a few more crumpled bills than the day before. And each night the pristine business card would be waiting for her on the counter, a silent, powerful testament to the easy way out. The temptation grew with her exhaustion. The mountain of debt remained, and her frantic efforts were nothing more than chipping away at it with a teaspoon. The deadline for Leo's masterclass loomed, and Nora was running out of time and out of hope. While Nora was fighting her losing battle, another quieter conflict was unfolding in a sprawling, opulent penthouse overlooking Boston Common. Beatrice Devereaux was feeling much better. The disorientation and confusion that had plagued her on that rainy night had receded, leaving behind a sharp, nagging guilt and a crystal-clear memory of a kind face. "She was so gentle, Jonathan," Beatrice said, for what felt like the 100th time sitting across from her son in their sun-drenched living room. "She brought me inside and gave me her own scarf. Her own scarf. People just don't do that anymore." Jonathan lowered his newspaper, his patience wearing thin. "Mother, we've been over this. She was a waitress looking for a payday. I handled it." "You handled it." Beatrice's voice was sharp. The fogginess in her mind might come and go, but her spirit was as formidable as ever. "What does that mean? Did you thank her? Did you offer her a reward?" "I offered her financial compensation for her time, and she refused," he said evasively, choosing his words with care. "She refused?" Beatrice sat up straighter, her interest piqued. "Why would she do that if she was, as you so cynically put it, looking for a payday?" Jonathan sighed, folding his paper with a decisive crackle. "Perhaps it was a negotiating tactic. She's holding out for more. It doesn't matter. The situation is resolved. Now about Dr. Albright's recommendation for the West Haven facility." "I am not going to a facility," Beatrice snapped, her eyes flashing. "And this is not resolved. I want to see that girl. I want to thank her myself. And I want to give her back her scarf." She clutched the green and cream scarf which she had kept in her room, refusing to let the household staff wash it as if the scent of rain and cheap restaurant soap were part of the memory. "Look at this craftsmanship, Jonathan. The detail in the stitching. This wasn't bought in a store. It was made with love. It meant something to her. I could feel it." Jonathan looked at the scarf, and for the first time he actually saw it. The intricate pattern, the quality of the wool. It did look personal. A seed of doubt, tiny and unwelcome, lodged itself in his mind. His assessment of Nora Kelly had been swift and absolute, based on a lifetime of experience with people trying to get a piece of the Devereaux fortune. But what if this one time he had been wrong? The thought was irritating. It suggested a flaw in his judgment, and Jonathan Devereaux did not like to be flawed. Her name was Nora. Beatrice continued, her voice softer. She had paint under her fingernails. Sad eyes, but a very strong chin. "Find her, Jonathan. Please." His mother's request, combined with his own gnawing uncertainty, was enough. Jonathan Devereux did not do things by halves. If he was going to investigate, he would do it thoroughly. "Garrett," he barked into his phone moments later, speaking to his head of security and personal investigator. "The waitress from the Gilded Spoon, Nora Kelly. I want a full discreet workup. Financials, family associates, social media, everything. I want to know what she has for breakfast. I want to know if she's ever so much as jaywalked. Get it done?" For the next 48 hours, Garrett, a quiet and ruthlessly efficient man, compiled a digital lifetime. He delved into Nora's sealed juvenile records, her credit score, her educational history. He tracked her online presence, her sparse social media, filled not with selfies, but with photos of art exhibits and museum pieces. He uncovered the story of her parents' death in a car accident years ago, leaving her as the sole guardian of her much younger, musically gifted brother. He compiled a dossier and presented it to his boss in Jonathan's sterile panoramic office on the 50th floor of the old Devereux Tower. Jonathan read the report in silence, his face an unreadable mask. Page after page painted a picture that starkly contradicted his initial assessment. Subject: Nora Kelly, age 24, occupation waitress, the Gilded Spoon, secondary employment, recently commenced bartender, the Rusty Anchor Pub, financial status heavily in debt, multiple student loans for a fine arts degree she never finished, credit cards maxed out, consistently late on rent for her Cambridge apartment, no savings, family Leo Kelly brother, age 18, a cello prodigy, recipient of a partial scholarship to the Vienna Conservatory of Music, first tuition payment of $10,000 due in 5 weeks, assets 2008, Honda Civic value negligible, art supplies, criminal record none. Noteworthy subject is the primary financial support for her brother. Bank statements show nearly 80% of her income is directed towards his living expenses and saving for his education. No extravagant purchases. No vacations. Social life appears minimal. The report was a portrait of quiet, desperate struggle. It was the story of a young woman who had sacrificed everything: her education, her passion, her youth for her brother. This wasn't the profile of a shrewd, opportunistic con artist. It was the profile of someone who, if she were a scammer, was a spectacularly unsuccessful one. Garrett, sensing the shift in his boss, added, "So we also looked into the incident at the restaurant. She was reprimanded by her manager and had her pay docked for the soup she gave your mother. Her hours have been cut since your visit." Jonathan's jaw tightened. So not only had his assumptions been wrong, but his actions had made her already difficult life even harder. The $5,000 he had offered with such contempt wasn't a payoff. For her, it was a lifeline he had insultingly dangled and then snatched away. Her angry refusal wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was raw, wounded pride. He felt a deep, unfamiliar pang of shame. Jonathan Devereux, had used the full weight of his power and wealth to bully a struggling young woman who had done nothing but show his mother kindness. "The art," Jonathan said, suddenly looking up from the file. "The report says she was an art student." "Yes, sir," Garrett confirmed. "Dropped out to support her brother after their parents died. According to her few social media posts, she still paints. Seems to be her only hobby." Jonathan stood up and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. In the distance, the skeletal frame of the new Devereux Tower clawed at the sky. He had spent the last year obsessed with every detail of its construction, especially the grand 3-story atrium lobby. He had rejected proposals from a dozen world-renowned artists for the lobby's centerpiece, finding them all cold, corporate, and soulless. He looked down at the dossier in his hand at the story of a girl with paint under her fingernails and debt collectors on her phone. He thought of his mother, stubbornly clinging to a handmade scarf as if it were a holy relic. A complex, unsettling idea began to form in his mind. Meanwhile, Beatrice, growing impatient with her son's inaction, decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew the name of the restaurant. She knew the girl's name was Nora. That was enough. On a bright, crisp Friday afternoon, she bypassed her driver, hailed a taxi for the first time in 20 years, and gave the driver the address for the Gilded Spoon. She was going to find the girl with the sad eyes and the warm scarf herself. Friday at the Gilded Spoon was organized chaos. The lunch rush was a frantic symphony of clanging pans, shouted orders, and the low roar of conversation. Nora moved through it all like a phantom, her body on autopilot, while her mind raced, calculating tips and deadlines. She was exhausted down to her bones. The bartending job ended at 3 a.m., and her waitress shift started at 11. The hours in between were a grey haze of fitful sleep. She was balancing a tray laden with pasta dishes when the bell over the door chimed. She didn't look up until she heard a voice, quiet but clear, cut through the noise. "I'm looking for Nora." Nora froze, her knuckles white on the edge of the tray. She slowly turned. Standing at the entrance, looking small and slightly overwhelmed but completely resolute, was Beatrice Devereux. She was dressed elegantly today, in a cashmere coat, and in her hands she held the green and cream scarf neatly folded. A wave of emotions crashed over Nora, relief, shock, and a sudden acute awareness of her stained apron and messy ponytail. Mr. Henderson spotted Beatrice immediately, his eyes widening at the obvious expense of her attire. He started to move towards her, no doubt to intercept what he assumed was another problem. "I've got this," Nora said, setting her tray down on a nearby station and walking towards the front, her heart pounding. Beatrice's face broke into a radiant, genuine smile when she saw her. "Nora, I knew I'd find you. I am so sorry for how I left the other night. I get confused sometimes. It was unforgivable of me to run off like that." "Please don't apologize," Nora said, her voice breathy. "I was just so worried. Are you okay? I am perfectly fine, and I believe this belongs to you," Beatrice said, holding out the scarf. Her hands were warm and dry as she pressed the soft wool into Nora's. "I can't thank you enough. Not just for the scarf and the soup, but for your kindness. You looked at me and saw a person, not a nuisance. That is a rare gift." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. To be seen, to be acknowledged, it was a balm on her raw, frayed nerves. "It was my grandmother's," she whispered, clutching the scarf to her chest. "It means the world to me." Just as Mr. Henderson reached them, his face a mixture of confusion and suspicion, the bell chimed again, this time with more force. The door swung open to reveal Jonathan Devereux. His face was a thundercloud of controlled panic. He had clearly discovered his mother was missing and tracked her here. His eyes locked on his mother, then on Nora. He saw the scarf being passed between them. He saw the genuine, tearful emotion on Nora's face and the warm affection on his mother's. He saw the entire scene, and the last vestiges of his cynical theory crumbled into dust. "Mother," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "You can't just run off like that. I had the entire security team searching for you." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Jonathan," Beatrice retorted, not taking her eyes off Nora. "I am a grown woman, perfectly capable of hailing a cab. I had to return something important." Jonathan walked towards them, his imposing presence silencing the nearby tables. He looked at Nora, and for the first time she didn't see arrogance or contempt in his eyes. She saw shame. "Miss Kelly," he said, his voice quiet, formal. "It appears I owe you a profound apology." Before Nora could respond, Beatrice turned to her son, her expression suddenly serious. "You told me you handled it. You let me believe you had thanked this young woman properly. But you didn't, did you? You came here, and you were cruel to her." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Beatrice knew her son better than anyone. She knew his suspicious nature, his tendency to use wealth as a weapon. Jonathan had the decency to look away, his jaw clenching. "I made an error in judgment." An error in judgment. Beatrice's voice rose, attracting more attention. "You insulted her. I can see it in her eyes. Why do you always assume the worst in people, Jonathan? Why must you believe that every person who shows a shred of decency has a hidden agenda?" "Because in my world they usually do," he shot back, his frustration boiling over. "Do you have any idea how many people try to manipulate us, to sue us, to get a piece of our fortune every single day? My first priority is to protect you. I don't need your protection from a kind-hearted girl who gave me her scarf," Beatrice cried. "I need your protection from you, from your suffocating paranoia. The reason I left the house that night without my coat or my phone was because we were fighting. You were talking about West Haven, again, about shipping me off to some gilded cage where I can be monitored for my own safety. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, so I ran. It was you who put me on that street corner, shivering and lost. And it was Nora who saved me." The public raw confession hung in the air of the suddenly silent restaurant. Mr. Henderson looked as if he might faint. Jonathan Devereux looked as if he'd been struck. He stared at his mother, the full weight of her words hitting him. His overprotective, controlling actions had directly led to the very danger he was trying to prevent. His gaze shifted to Nora, who stood awkwardly, a silent witness to the painful unraveling of a powerful family. He saw her not as a waitress, not as a threat or a variable to be managed, but as the quiet center of this storm, the person whose simple humanity had exposed the deep fractures in his own. "I was wrong," Jonathan said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue. He was speaking to both his mother and to Nora. "Completely and utterly wrong. Miss Kelly, Nora, I am truly sorry. For my assumptions, for my words, and for my behavior. It was inexcusable." The apology was simple, direct, and stripped of all his usual corporate armor. It was the most honest thing Nora had ever heard him say. She simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The emotional whiplash of the last few minutes had left her reeling. She had her scarf back, but she had been handed a glimpse into a world of pain and privilege she couldn't begin to comprehend. The awkward, charged silence in the diner was broken by Beatrice. "Well," she said with an air of finality, "the apology is a start, but it's not enough. We've disrupted this young woman's workday and made a dreadful scene. The least we can do is get out of her hair." She turned to Nora. "My dear, I would be honored if you would join us for a proper conversation. Not here. Somewhere we can speak freely." Before Nora could protest, Jonathan stepped in, his voice now calm and decisive. "My mother is right. Would you be willing to meet with us tomorrow at my office? I will compensate you for your time, of course." He quickly added, "As a professional courtesy, not as a payoff." Nora looked from his sincere, troubled face to Beatrice's expectant one. Her mind was a whirlwind. Going to his office felt like stepping into the lion's den. Yet something had fundamentally shifted. The power dynamic was no longer so one-sided. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the person who held the moral high ground, and they both knew it. Plus, a small defiant part of her was curious to see the world from which this man launched his assaults. "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." The next day, Nora stood before the gleaming monolith of the old Devereux Tower, feeling hopelessly small. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, an echo chamber of wealth. When she gave her name at the security desk, she was met not with suspicion, but with a respectful nod. "Mr. Devereux is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the top floor." The ride up was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. The office itself was breathtaking with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of Boston. Jonathan and Beatrice were waiting for her, not behind a massive desk, but in a seating area with comfortable chairs. Coffee and pastries were laid out on the table. "Nora, thank you for coming," Beatrice said, her warmth instantly putting Nora a little more at ease. "I want to begin by reiterating my apology," Jonathan said, forgoing any small talk. "And I want to make amends. My investigator," he winced slightly at the word, "informed me of your financial situation, the difficulties you're facing. He also informed me that my actions at the restaurant led to your hours being cut. I have already spoken to your manager. That will be rectified. But that's not enough." He slid the same thick envelope from the diner across the table. "This contains $10,000. Please, not as a reward, not as hush money, as restitution, for the trouble I've caused, for the wages you've lost, and for the profound misjudgment I made. It's the least I can do." Nora stared at the envelope. It was everything she needed. It was Leo's deposit. It was the master class. It was the answer to her prayers offered freely and with a sincere apology. A week ago she would have snatched it without a second thought, but the Nora who sat in this office was not the same one who had cried on her kitchen floor. She had faced down this man's contempt and had her integrity affirmed. She had gotten her grandmother's scarf back. She had found a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. Taking the money now felt like charity, a closing of a chapter she wasn't ready to end. She pushed the envelope back towards him. Jonathan looked baffled. "I don't understand." "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Devereux. I really do," Nora said, her voice steady. "But I can't accept it." Beatrice leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "But why, my dear? You've earned it." "I don't want to be a problem you solve with a check." Nora explained the words coming to her with surprising clarity. "I don't want this story between us to be about a rich man paying off the poor waitress he insulted. I want to earn what I get, on my own terms." Jonathan leaned back, studying her with a new, intense curiosity. "What are your terms?" This was it. The moment. An idea, wild and audacious, had been percolating in her mind since she learned he was building the new tower. It was a long shot, a leap of faith so vast it terrified her. She took a deep breath and reached for the worn portfolio she had brought with her. "I know you're building the new Devereux Tower across the city," she began, her voice gaining confidence. "And I know the lobby is designed to be a public art space. Your mother mentioned I had paint under my fingernails. She was right. I'm an artist. That's who I am, even if I haven't been able to make a living at it." She opened the portfolio on the coffee table. Inside were vibrant, powerful sketches and photographs of her smaller sculptures, abstract forms full of movement and emotion, dynamic compositions of color and light. They were a stark contrast to the quiet, subdued waitress they knew. Jonathan and Beatrice leaned in their eyes, widening in surprise. The work was raw, but it was undeniably brilliant. It had a soul. "I don't want your charity, Mr. Devereux," Nora said, her gaze firm and direct. "I want a commission. I've seen the architectural plans for the new lobby online. I know the space where the centerpiece is meant to go. I can create something for that space. Something that speaks of the city of connection, of how a single act can ripple outwards. Something with more life than a checkbook. She looked him straight in the eye. Hire me. Pay me a professional artist's fee for the project. An advance on that fee would be more than enough to cover my brother's tuition. I will earn the money, and you will get a piece of art for your building that has a real story behind it, not just a famous signature. The sheer audacity of her proposal hung in the silent, opulent office. She hadn't just refused his money, she had flipped the entire power dynamic. She was no longer asking for a handout, she was making a professional pitch. Beatrice was beaming her eyes, shining with delight. She looked at her son, a silent challenge in her gaze. Jonathan was utterly captivated. He had spent his life surrounded by people who said yes by sycophants and subordinates. He had never met anyone like Nora Kelly. She had stood up to his power, refused his money, and now sat in his office demanding not a favor, but an opportunity on her own merit. He looked from her fierce, hopeful face to the stunning artwork in her portfolio, and back to the grand, unfinished tower visible through his window. His lobby didn't need another cold, calculated piece by a famous artist. It needed a heart. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine, unguarded smile Nora had ever seen from him. "Miss Kelly," Jonathan Devereux said, extending a hand across the table. "You've got yourself a deal." 6 months later, the Nora Kelly who walked through the revolving doors of the newly completed Devereux Tower was a different woman. She still had sad eyes, perhaps, but they were now lit from within by the quiet fire of purpose. The waitress uniform was gone, replaced by paint-splattered jeans and a comfortable sweater she wore in her new studio, a bright, airy loft space in the South End, paid for by the first installment of her commission. The gilded spoon and the rusty anchor were a distant memory, a chapter of her life that felt like it had happened to someone else. Her days were now filled with the familiar smells of turpentine and clay, the satisfying ache in her muscles from wrestling with metal, and the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. The project had consumed her. Jonathan, true to his word, had given her complete artistic freedom. He had become a regular visitor to her studio at first, under the guise of checking on the project's progress, but soon it became clear he was drawn to the chaotic, creative energy of the space, a world so alien to his own structured corporate existence. They talked for hours not just about art, but about their lives, their families, their dreams. He learned about her passion, her fierce love for her brother. She learned about the immense pressure he lived under, his deep-seated fear of failing his family's legacy, and his complicated love for his brilliant, strong-willed mother. A fragile, tentative friendship bloomed amongst the dust sheets and welding tools. Beatrice was a constant welcome presence. She would bring tea and sit for hours watching Nora work, sharing stories of her own youth and travels. She became the grandmother figure Nora had lost so long ago, a source of wisdom, encouragement, and sharp-witted humor. She and Beatrice had saved each other in a way. Leo was thriving in Vienna. His weekly video calls were the highlight of Nora's week. He was no longer just a prodigy. He was becoming a true artist, his music deepening with every lesson, every performance. The masterclass had been a turning point for him, and knowing she had made it possible was a feeling more satisfying than any tip she had ever earned. Tonight was the grand unveiling. The lobby of the Devereux Tower was filled with Boston's elite politicians, investors, art critics and society figures, all sipping champagne and murmuring in anticipation. A huge white cloth concealed the centerpiece of the atrium. Nora stood to the side with Jonathan and Beatrice, feeling a nervous tremor in her hands. "What if they hate it?" she whispered. Then they are fools with no taste, Beatrice said, firmly squeezing her arm. Jonathan leaned in close. I've seen it every step of the way, Nora. It's magnificent. And it's the soul of this building. Let them see it. He walked to the podium and tapped the microphone. The crowd quieted. He spoke of the tower, of its architecture, of its place in the future of the city. Then his tone shifted, becoming more personal. A building is more than steel and glass, he said, his eyes finding Nora's in the crowd. It needs a heart, a story. 6 months ago, I was taught a valuable lesson about seeing the person, not the circumstance. I learned that true value isn't always quantifiable, and that the greatest strength can be found in the quietest acts of compassion. The piece we are about to unveil is the result of that lesson. It was created by an artist of extraordinary talent and even greater integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you The Thread by Nora Kelly. 2 men pulled the ropes, and the white sheet fell away. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The sculpture was breathtaking. It was a massive, swirling form of polished bronze and interwoven steel cables that soared 3 stories high, catching the light from every angle. It was abstract, yet it clearly evoked a human connection, a reaching out. And woven through the cold, hard metal, like a warm and vibrant pulse, was a single thick, unmistakable band of green and cream-colored glass flowing through the sculpture in the exact complex, cable-knit pattern of her grandmother's scarf. It was a monument not to wealth or power, but to a single moment of kindness on a rainy night. It was the story of a waitress, a billionaire, and his mother. It was Nora's story, forged in metal and light for the entire city to see. As the lobby erupted in applause, Nora felt tears welling in her eyes. She looked at her reflection in the polished marble floor, no longer a ghost in a waitress uniform, but an artist standing beside her masterpiece. She had not only paid for her brother's dream, she had finally, against all odds, stepped into the light of her own. Nora's story reminds us that the world can be changed by the smallest of gestures. A simple act of kindness, of seeing another person's humanity in a moment of distress, can set in motion a series of events that you could never imagine. It's a powerful testament to the idea that your circumstances don't define your character. Nora was a waitress, but her integrity, her strength and her talent were worth more than any billionaire's fortune. She didn't just receive a gift. She created an opportunity, proving that the most valuable things in life, compassion, dignity, and artistic vision, can never be bought, only earned. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to click the like button and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. What was the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Share your own experiences in the comments below. We'd love to read them.